It's an honor for me to introduce Rachel Lazar, President and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Americans United is an organization that I'm proud to be a member of, and that frankly I think all humanistic Jews, and really all Jews, should support, and here's why. So many of the societal issues we care about today directly relate to defending the wall between government and religion, from LGBTQ equality to reproductive rights to even climate change policy. And I'll let Rachel speak more about the specifics, but what I want to share is humanistic Judaism's connection to it. Humanistic Jews are a double minority. As Jews, we are part of a minority religious group. Only about 2% of Americans identify as Jewish. And as openly secular Americans, we are part of another minority, although a growing minority. Polls find that about a quarter of all Americans now don't identify with a religion. And that's a significant increase from just a decade ago. Of course, not being affiliated with a religion doesn't automatically mean secular, but it suggests secular Americans are increasing. But it's still easier to be openly secular within the Jewish community than in the wider American society. Secular Americans have almost no representation in Congress, and openly secular people experience discrimination that seems to be on the rise. As recently as last week, the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. ruled that the chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives can continue to bar atheists from delivering invocations. And yes, there's a chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives. It's your tax dollars at work. When I started at the Society for Humanistic Judaism, I surveyed the excellent community service and social justice work already happening throughout the movement. And I realized that on many, if not most issues, humanistic Jews are far from united. So on gun control, it is not controversial in some of our communities, and in other communities we don't talk about gun control. And on Israel, we've got as wide a diversity of opinions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as Israelis and Palestinians. But where I found near unanimous support is in the call for enforcing separation of religion and government as provided for in the US Constitution. So to raise up our movement's efforts, last year we launched the new initiative that was just mentioned, Jews for a Secular Democracy. It is a pluralistic initiative for all Jews and friends and family to advocate for government neutral toward all or no religion from a specifically Jewish perspective. But before we launched publicly, I called Rachel at Americans United to let her know about it and that we see this initiative as totally complementary to their work. And despite only having just begun at AU a few months earlier, Rachel was kind enough to spend time talking with me about it. She totally got it and was supportive of our efforts. As Jews, as secular humanists, I feel it's imperative to support the work of Americans United. And in fact, we have several leaders in our movement who are also deeply involved in AU's work. And that's the great thing about doing good. It's not a zero-sum game. For example, I'm a member of my local Humanistic Judaism congregation, and I support the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and I'm a member of Americans United. And I would never tell you what to do, but you should all do that too. It's been so impressive to watch from afar as Rachel has stepped up to the leadership role at Americans United at a time when the work of defending the separation of church and state has never been harder or more important. It's why earlier tonight the Society for Humanistic Judaism awarded Rachel with the inaugural Jews for a Secular Democracy Constitutional Defender Award. Before Rachel became president and CEO at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, she served as the deputy director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which is another really fantastic organization. Before that, she directed the cultural program at Third Way, a Washington, D.C.-based progressive think tank. She's a lawyer, advocate, and strategist who has dedicated her career to making our country more inclusive. Please welcome Rachel Lazar.
Shabbat Shalom. I would like to start by reading you a quote. "The right to believe or not believe is the most fundamental of freedoms. When religious liberty is denied or destroyed, we know that other freedoms, freedom of speech, of press, of assembly, and even democratic institutions themselves are imperiled." I know this is a tough one, but does anyone want to hazard a guess about who might have said this?
Felix Frankfurter.
Okay, no, but good guess. Anyone else? Thomas Jefferson, no, but he could have.
Ronald Reagan.
Not even Alexander Hamilton. These are Vice President Pence's remarks at the U.S. State Department's Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom from last July. These words sound fine, right? He's recognizing non-theists, he's acknowledging the importance of religious freedom to democracy. We agree. Less surprising is how Pence's speech ends, with a declaration that belief in God is what gives America freedom. Quote, "For as the Bible tells us, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So freedom always wins when faith in Him is held high. May God bless you and your nations, and may God bless the United States of America." The story I want to tell tonight is about the clever strategy that the religious right and the highest level government officials are using to co-opt the term religious freedom to advance their political agenda. It's about the rhetoric not matching the reality. It's an ugly story about the politicization of one of America's most sacred principles and the use of it to discriminate and hurt people. And it's a story about a grave threat to true religious freedom for all Americans. First, because it's so easy to take it for granted and misunderstood in today's political climate, I'll spend a little time reminding us why religious freedom is such an essential right and why you can't have it without the separation of religion and government. Then I'll describe how religious freedom today is under attack, and what's worse, how it's being misused to undermine true religious freedom. And finally, I'll talk about the national movement we need to build in order to safeguard religious freedom for generations to come, and how you can be part of it. And you already have started with this wonderful project. But let's start with the basics. Because thanks to all the misinformation spread by leaders like Vice President Pence, everyone living in America today could use a refresher about what true religious freedom is and just how core it is to our country. First, a short history lesson. Historians, as well as Supreme Court justices, widely regard the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom as the foundation of how the framers of the Constitution and First Amendment approached matters of religion and government. Thomas Jefferson drafted the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1777 to protect those who deviated or dissented from the state-sanctioned Anglican Church at that time. It became law in 1785 thanks to the efforts of Jefferson's friend and political ally, James Madison. It's hard to believe that Virginia actually required its citizens to attend Sunday Church of England church services, isn't it? Journalist Frederick Clarkson notes that failure to attend services was the most prosecuted crime in Virginia for many years. But with the passage of the Virginia statute, people were no longer required to worship at a state church. Jefferson emphasized that the aim of this statute was to protect, quote, the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mahometan, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination. take a minute to think about how radical that idea was in 1785. But it's also important to understand that it wasn't entirely selfless. Jefferson includes the Gentile and the Christian in his list of who the religious freedom law was designed to protect. Back in that day, it was well understood that religious freedom was key to protecting and even strengthening all beliefs, including mainstream Christianity. As Roger Williams, the Baptist theologian who founded Rhode Island in 1636 as the first colony with separation of church and state, famously said, "Forced worship stinks in the nostrils of God." In other words, religious freedom allows people to come to their beliefs themselves instead of being coerced, and our founders got that. So religious freedom exists to protect all of us. Here's what I think religious freedom means. We all should have the freedom to be religious, not to be religious, to change our belief system over the course of our lifetime, or to practice whatever religion we want in whatever way we want, so long as we aren't harming others. Religious freedom recognizes that our choices around religion are so deeply personal that for many of us they shape our core identities and at least one of our core communities. It acknowledges that people's religious or non-religious identities can be so powerful that some are even willing to die to preserve them. Religious freedom is key to America's commitment to diversity. In this case, our embrace of the thousands of religions practiced across our shores. America would not be America without it. I will add that for me personally as a Jew, as I imagine for many of you too, America's commitment to religious freedom is crucial to feeling secure. It gives me and my family a feeling of equal belonging and affords us equal opportunity. It has enabled me to do so many things that I take for granted. Basic things like sending my kids to public school without fearing that they will be taught a religion that is not our family's, raising my kids to be part of a Jewish community among other communities, and being eligible for even the highest level of government jobs, just like my Christian neighbors. America's commitment to religious freedom also enabled my relatives, as I imagine many of yours, to flee religious persecution, rebuild their lives here, and even thrive. And let's also pause to remember that separating religion and government is the linchpin of religious freedom. When the Founding Fathers wrote the First Amendment, they baked church-state separation right into it. Sheila read earlier, actually, from Jefferson's letter in 1802 to the Danbury Baptists, but I'll read it again. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should, quote, First Amendment, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. As you just heard, the First Amendment has two religion clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, and they work together to protect religious freedom. The Establishment Clause, which is really about the government not establishing religion, puts limits on the Free Exercise Clause. No one can exercise their religion such that they're using the government's power to impose their religion on the rest of us. The Establishment Clause prohibits the government from endorsing or disparaging any one religion over another or religion over non-religion in order to protect your and my religious freedom. I hope you'll agree with me that religious freedom and church-state separation should be a priority for all of us. But if you need more convincing, allow me to paint a grim picture about how the religious right, in partnership with the Trump-Pence administration, is tearing down the wall, separating religion and government, and misusing our cherished principle of religious freedom to advance a regressive social and political agenda that actually undermines your and my religious freedom. A few weeks ago, I met with a group of college students from Stanford who were on a spring break trip in DC studying religion and politics. I posed the following question to the room. When you think about religious freedom, what comes to mind? Right out of the gate, one student responded, homophobia. There was soon a consensus in the room. Rather than the lofty ideals I spoke of earlier, like freedom and diversity, this group of college students associates religious freedom with discrimination against LGBTQ people. How sad, right? But they're not crazy to think this. Here's a true story to illustrate why. Amy Madonna lives in Simpsonville, South Carolina with her husband and 3 kids, 2 of whom are autistic. Sitting in her living room earlier this year, I witnessed firsthand what a patient and devoted mom she is. Amy's dad grew up in the foster care system at a time when foster parents weren't well vetted, and he had a rough time. As an adult, he wanted to provide foster kids with a better experience than he had had, and he welcomed hundreds of the most vulnerable foster kids into his home, providing Amy with many brothers and sisters, some for just a few days, some for months or longer. Now Amy wants to teach her kids the same values and provide a loving family experience for a new generation of foster kids. Since her children have special needs, her and her husband's plan was first to volunteer with foster kids so that they could ensure they were a good fit before officially fostering. Amy knew Miracle Hill Ministries was the largest and most advertised foster care agency in her community, and that they allowed both adults and children to volunteer. She felt it would be the perfect arrangement. Miracle Hill felt the same way until they learned that Amy is Catholic. At that point, they told her, "I'm sorry, we only allow volunteers and mentors who are, quote, Protestant Christians." It turns out that Miracle Hill, which receives $600,000 of our federal and state taxpayer money every year, serves only evangelical Protestants. It's not just Amy who they've rejected. Miracle Hill has also denied 2 Jewish couples the ability to volunteer, even though they, like Amy, were highly qualified. When the South Carolina governor, Henry McMaster, and the Trump administration found out about what was going on, rather than denouncing this government-funded discrimination, they doubled down. Governor McMaster issued an executive order specifically to allow state-funded foster care agencies to reject prospective parents who don't share their religion. Then, on January 23rd, the day after the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, January 22nd, 1973, not a coincidence, the Trump-Pence administration announced it too would allow all South Carolina foster agencies to refuse to work with anyone they deem the wrong religion, granting them an explicit exemption from federal anti-discrimination regulations. Unbelievably, the Trump administration's stated basis for licensing religious discrimination is the, quote, religious freedom rights of Miracle Hill and other faith-based foster care agencies. This is why those Stanford kids aren't wrong when they say religious freedom is about discrimination these days. In February, my organization, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, filed a lawsuit in federal court on behalf of Amy Madonna to stop the federal government and South Carolina from authorizing and encouraging discrimination with taxpayer dollars. The lawsuit, called Madonna versus United States Department of Health and Human Services, alleges that permitting governmental discrimination based on religion violates the First Amendment's religious freedom protections. When the government gives special religious exemptions and when the government gives special religious exemptions and our taxpayer money to Miracle Hill, they're endorsing Miracle Hill's religious discrimination. The government should never be in the business of endorsing the belief that only evangelical Protestants can make good foster parents. And the government should not sanction the use of religion to cause harm to others, because forcing someone to bear the cost of someone else's religion is giving special treatment to one set of religious beliefs over others. At Americans United, we like to say it this way: religious freedom should be a shield that protects people, not a sword to harm others and discriminate. In this case, the government is misusing religious freedom to cause unmistakable and grave harm on so many fronts. There's harm to prospective parents like Amy, who are being discriminated against and turned away based solely on being the wrong religion. There's harm to the more than 5,000 kids in foster care in South Carolina who have a lesser chance of finding a permanent home. And there's harm to the kids placed by these agencies in homes where evangelical Christianity is imposed on them, whether they share the faith or not. And let's not leave out the harm to you and me, because our tax money pays for this. I know I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you that President Trump and Vice President Pence are pandering to far-right evangelical Christians and their political agenda because they form the base of their voting bloc. It's clear from the data, Trump maintains around a 70% approval rating among white evangelicals, which is nearly 20 points higher than among any other religious group. As Trump told a group of conservative evangelical Christians he invited to the White House last summer for a dinner in their honor, quote, "The support you've given me has been incredible, but I really don't feel guilty because I have given you a lot back, just about everything I promised. And as one of our great pastors just said, actually, you've given us much more, sir, than you promised." And I think that's true in many respects. Thus, not surprisingly, so many of his actions that Trump labels as being about protecting religious freedom are really about elevating one narrow fundamentalist interpretation of Christianity and misusing religious freedom to harm others, usually people in the LGBTQ community and women. To name just two more of countless examples, in January, the Trump administration released a final rule allowing all bosses and universities to deny women access to birth control promised them under the Affordable Care Act if they have a religious or moral objection. We have sued the Trump administration and Notre Dame to challenge this rule. Any day now, this is the second one, look out for this one. The Department of Health and Human Services is supposed to release a final regulation that would allow anyone associated with the healthcare system, doctors, healthcare workers, hospitals, and anyone working at them, including receptionists and janitors, to refuse to participate in any healthcare for which they have a moral or religious objection. This would include life-saving services like ending an ectopic pregnancy. This rule could even allow a doctor to attempt to deny fertility treatments to an interfaith couple, or a nurse to refuse to treat a transgender patient who has the flu. We're prepared to take action. And this is not just happening in the administration. There's also a full frontal campaign taking place in state legislatures across the country to codify a far-right evangelical Christian nation and allow discrimination in the name of religious freedom. And it's called Project Blitz. Backed by 3 religious right groups, Project Blitz's strategy is to pass an increasingly ambitious set of laws in states, starting with ones that are harder to prevent from going through, like requiring prominently displaying "In God We Trust" in public schools and teaching Bible classes in public schools, and eventually escalating to laws that would permit religion to be used to discriminate. Project Blitz's 150-page playbook, replete with 21 model bills, strategy, and messaging guidance, was distributed to more than 800 state legislators across America in 2018. So together, Trump, Pence, and their emboldened allies are weaponizing religious freedom and turning what is supposed to be a shield that protects us into a sword that harms people and stops social progress. And it is robbing you and me of our religious freedom. Is your blood pressure elevated yet? It should be. The million-dollar question is, what can we do about this? Americans United's board and senior staff have spent this past year thinking hard about this question, and I'm excited to share some of our thinking here publicly for the first time. We know what we want. An America where this is from our vision statement, an America where everyone can freely choose a faith and support it voluntarily, or follow no religious or spiritual path at all, and where the government does not promote religion over non-religion or favor one faith over another. In this America, the government is never in the business of imposing one set of religious beliefs on the rest of us, or giving special privileges to any one religion, or allowing religion to be used to nullify protections for vulnerable communities of people and to stop America's progress towards achieving our ideals. We know that the clock is ticking, with the opposition chipping away at our freedom every day in our private lives, workplaces, schools, government services, and healthcare systems. But too few Americans know or think about what religious freedom is, and actually understand how foundational it is to all of our lives and to our country. And similarly, not enough Americans are aware of the extent to which church-state separation is under attack today. So the answer is, we have to make more noise. We have to remind people about the importance of church-state separation, take back the meaning of true religious freedom, become more visible, and ignite a national movement that insists on separating religion and government. Yes, we need to continue to sue in court and to shape public policy in Congress and across the states, and Americans United will never stop doing this with your help. But we must make sure that we are also inspiring younger people who are tirelessly and passionately fighting for the future of our country and who need to put church-state separation at the top of their priority list. And to do this, we must connect the dots between church-state separation and other key issues that they care about, like racial justice, LGBTQ equality, reproductive freedom, climate change, etc. And to succeed in building a national movement, we know we need to broaden and diversify our supporters. In addition to targeting younger adults, we must do a better job of reaching people of color, who will soon be a majority in this country. We will build Black and brown allies in our youth-focused work, and also when we strengthen our already extensive ties to the religious community. We heard earlier the religious nones, N-O-N-E-S, are growing in America, and they will always form a crucial block of our supporters. At the same time, with 70% of the country still identifying as Christian, we need to continue to build Christian allies alongside our religious minority ones and bring Christians, religious minorities, and the non-religious together to advocate for church-state separation. And I'm really proud to say that just a few months ago, I got the president of the National Council of Churches, which is an umbrella group for 38 different Christian denominations, to join the board of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We must not let our opponents' false claim that we are anti-religion continue to cost us support or scare our faith allies away from proudly standing with us. We know that church-state separation is good for religion, and many religious people agree. So that we are speaking in the most effective ways to these different audiences, Americans United will conduct our first ever public opinion research. This research will give us insights into what modern day messages work to reach the people we must mobilize. Americans United plans to start fortifying our national movement by creating state networks in 20 states over the next 5 years. Our state networks will engage supporters and young people with digital advocacy and offer them a ladder of engagement. Because if we know one thing already, it's that, and look around, younger Americans are not big joiners. So we will test strategies to build these modern day networks as we go. In the end, we know we will prevail because we are fighting on the side of American values like freedom, diversity, equality, respect, and even patriotism. But we know we also have a secret ingredient that our opponents do not. And quite frankly, it's you. Folks like you who get our issue so intuitively have been and will continue to be the bedrock of the movement we will grow and strengthen. So if you haven't already, please do join Americans United and get your friends to do the same. You will be supporting important lawsuits like the Amy Madonna one, critical, proactive, and defensive work in Congress and state legislatures, and the movement building we will be engaging in over these next 5 years and beyond. You will also get our awesome magazine with a personal column from me each month. We will plug you into taking action in your state and federally and keep you up to speed on developments. And if you aren't a joiner, then as a start, please consider following us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Americans United. We need you to help lay the bricks for this movement from the ground up in any way you can. The truth is, each of us can use our voice and be effective advocates in ways that we are most comfortable and uniquely positioned to do. And we all need to make an effort to take this issue out of the realm of the strictly abstract and make it more personal and human, like the Amy Madonna story does. To that end, please indulge me one final time. Could everyone here please take a moment to think about why religious freedom and separating religion and government is important to you? Maybe you have a personal story of your own to share or one to tell about a family member. Perhaps you have thoughts about why religious freedom is important to you as a humanistic or secular Jew, or as an American Jew, or just as a Jew, or perhaps just as an American. And when you're ready, turn to your neighbor or neighbors and share your story. Practice making noise, and then give your neighbor a few minutes to tell you why religious freedom is important to them. And after that, we'll open it up to questions. So thanks again for the honor of receiving the award and being with you.